friends are just so important. I was on national television yesterday talking about how depression and anxiety disorders in children doubled over the pandemic. And I think it, in large part, was the isolation and the decrease in human connection. And being connected digitally is just, it's not the same for developing brains as those people who are actually connected in person. So it's a very interesting time. It's a historically stressful time. I saw this quote, though, that I thought was fun. So a friend will help you move, goes the old saying, while a good friend will help you move a body. And why not? Moral qualms aside, that good friend would likely agree the victim was an intolerable jerk who had it coming. And geez, you shouldn't have done this, but where do you keep the shovel? So how do you get people
oh my goodness.
connected to you? We are a relationship species. We're not polar bears. Polar bears do just fine without friends. It doesn't make them sad or depressed at all. But humans were made or evolved to be connected to others because it is literally a survival mechanism in the brain. And so having a group of people you trust is absolutely essential. I'm going to talk about friendship from a neuroscience perspective. Let's just be super clear. Your brain, so the physical functioning of your brain, the 3 pounds of fat between your ears is involved in everything you do, how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. Your brain is the organ of judgment, personality, intelligence, and every friend you make. So if we start with that, then it becomes really clear to me, and we're doing this cool series on Instagram called Scan My Brain, that we're taking influencers, scanning them, and it's just been so fascinating. But with a healthy brain, your friendships are easier. And when your brain is not healthy, for whatever reason, you have fewer friendships or more turmoil in your friendships. And so the first principle is want, develop, focus on having a healthy brain. Because when it's healthy, you're happier, healthier, wealthier, because you make better decisions and you're more connected. When it's not healthy, sadder, sicker, poorer, your decisions aren't as good, which means you become less connected over time. And so I want to talk about some of the systems in the brain and how they're related to friendship. So I like to think of 4 of them that are intimately involved with trust, behavior, and connection. And I talked about this last time when we were talking about leadership. The front third of your brain, called the prefrontal cortex, largest in humans and any other animal by far. 30% of the human brain, 11% of the chimpanzee brain, 7% of your dog's brain, 3% of your cat's brain. It's so involved in relationships and friendships. It's the supervisor in your head. It watches you, involved in things like focus and forethought, impulse control, planning, empathy, insight, and learning from the mistakes you make. So when your prefrontal cortex works right, you are much more likely to be connected to other people in a positive way because you can see things from their point of view. And one of the things you'll hear me say, if you want to strengthen your friendships, it is absolutely critical to listen, to not speak over people, to not interrupt. And this means you have to have a break in your brain that stops you from just interrupting the people in your life. And empathy, seeing things from another person's point of view. When there's trouble, and there are all sorts of reasons to have trouble in this part of the brain, and societal reasons that are just, it just worries me. They go on, like letting children hit soccer balls with their head. We're just about to release Scan My Brain series with Daniel Sharman, the young actor from Medici, and I adore him. And he said after he read Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, he stopped heading soccer balls, and then his friends wouldn't let him play with them because that was part of the game. But you could see the trouble from the concussions he had experienced. And so he wakes up every morning sad and had no idea it was related to traumatic brain injury. And so as we balance his brain, he's going to wake up happier. And happier people are easier. It's just easier to connect with other people. When there are problems in this part of the brain, from a head injury, from toxic exposure, from carbon monoxide exposure, people tend to have short attention spans. And one of the things I often say when I lecture is, what does an orgasm require? Focus. You have to focus on the feeling long enough in order to make that happen. Well, what do friendships require? They require you to pay attention to the other person. And all of us know people where when we talk to them, the people just sort of go into their own problems and never go, how are you? And then pause and really want to know the answer. See, with friendships, you can't just talk about your problems. It's critical to pause and then connect with the other person. Well, that requires a healthy prefrontal cortex so you can see the world from their point of view, not just your own, and then not constantly interrupt them. I think I have treated, well, I know I've treated more than 20,000 people with ADD or ADHD over the years, and often they struggle in relationships. Short attention span, distractibility, disorganization. So they're often late, which really upsets their friends. Procrastination, they often won't do what they say they'll do until someone's mad at them. And then impulse control. And when we treat their ADD, they begin to bring people toward them rather than push them away with their behavior. And nobody knows, right? Because nobody looks at the brain. So how would you know that chronic problem you have in friendships is actually due to the physical functioning of your brain or your friend's brain? And then with low activity here, people also tend to be excitement seeking, conflict seeking, or negative seeking. In my book, Healing ADD, there's a whole chapter on the games ADD people play. And one of the games they play is Let's Have a Problem, because that stimulates their brain and it makes them feel better. But for everybody else, it makes them feel worse. And so optimizing your prefrontal cortex is just such a critical piece of the friendship puzzle from a neuroscience standpoint. So, if you've had those kinds of problems, getting a look at your brain could be a wonderful thing. Let me help you grow your brain and tame the hidden dragons that control your happiness, habits, and hangups. So I prepared a talk for you. It's based on my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. People ask me why the dragons in this book. If you read my books, I've always got something going on, whether it's an anteater to kill the ants that we talked about last time, the automatic negative thoughts, seahorses that represent your hippocampus in the brain. But today we're going to talk about dragons. Tolkien, one of my favorite authors ever, said it's just simply not an adventure worth telling if there aren't any dragons. I'm so excited for many of us. We're beginning to come out of the pandemic. I actually remember when it started for me, I had just published my book, The End of Mental Illness, and was on a book tour that got canceled March 10th, 2020. And I remember that night, I wrote down this phrase: mental hygiene is just as important as washing your hands, that we need to disinfect our thoughts and tame the dragons that drive anxiety, depression, addiction, stress, and bad habits. And I believed, and it's absolutely come true, that COVID-19 would spawn a mental health pandemic, which it absolutely did. Depression tripled just from February of 2020 to August of 2020. And so here's one of our cool little animations about the dragons breathing fire on your emotional brain and ruining your life. Quick story. He's actually the opening story in the book. Jimmy was actually the son of the leader of the Mexican mafia in Los Angeles. And he's a high-level business executive. The day I met him, which was Halloween 2019, he had just been released from the hospital after feeling suicidal. He had severe panic attacks, anxiety, dread, whenever he was asked to speak in public. If I had to describe the fear, he said, it's like you're on death row and the clocks run out and the guard opens the door and you must take the first step. That kind of fear runs through my bones. This is a quote from my first session with him. He had glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking, since he was 12 years old, when his grandmother asked him to make an impact statement for his father, who was on trial for double murder. His father actually went on to write a best-selling book about the gangs in LA, and still is in jail. What if I cannot speak and end up killing my dad, was the thought he had. His brain was filled with what we call automatic negative thoughts, or the thoughts that just come into your mind automatically and ruin your day. And ants
tend to stack, link with each other, and then they attack you. And so this was his ant trail. I can't speak in public, so I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be afraid of interviewing, so I won't be able to get a new job. I'm a loser. My wife will divorce me. I'll end up on the streets. I should kill myself. Thoughts, you should write this down. Thoughts create feelings. Feelings create behaviors. Behaviors create outcomes. So if you really want to help someone, you want to make sure they get their thoughts to help them rather than to hurt them. When you look at this poor kid's past, he had intense, persistent trauma. He watched his dad deal drugs and assault others. When he was 8, SWAT officers broke his apartment door down with guns drawn. When visiting his dad in prison, his dad made him go up to other gang leaders. It was very scary for him to test his mettle. It's a common theme throughout our therapy. He witnessed drive-by shootings, was in car chases before the age of 9. He'd been kidnapped twice by feuding family members. His mother kept his siblings, but she sent him to live with his grandparents. So you can see where the abandoned dragon comes in. He witnessed his grandmother being raped. And then the rapist asked if he wanted to participate. Imagine how that will mess with your mind. He had ancestral dragons. Both sides were loaded with anxiety, depression, drug abuse. And he had bad habit dragons. He actually loved watching violent movies, boxing, UFC fights, execution and animal fights based on something called the arousal template. If you want to know where fetishes start, the arousal template is where were you when you were first aroused. It's often so intense that it triggers an addiction. There's always brain influences. I think that's what I'm most known for in the world is the brain imaging work we do. He had head injuries playing football. He boxed in high school. When he was 15, he fell 8 feet onto his head, was unconscious, lost his hearing, had to learn to walk again. He'd used drugs and alcohol as a teenager. Whenever we think of people at Amen clinics, I have 9, soon to be 10 clinics around the country. But we always think of our patients in these 4 big circles. You know, what's going on with your brain, with your mind, with your relationships, and with your soul, which is, why do you care? What's your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? And part of what we do is we scan people. We do a study called SPECT that looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how the brain works. Example of a healthy scan, Jimmy had damage to his left temporal lobe, probably from the repetitive head injuries he had. And his emotional brain was just on fire, probably because of the intense trauma he had. He had an ACE score at first childhood experiences. It's on a scale of 0 to 10. People who have a score of 4 or more die on average 20 years earlier than people who are under 4. He had a score of 8. And hypervigilance just sort of got stuck in his brain. So, but with treatment, he thrived. Diligent dragon and ant taming, medication for his left temporal lobe, supplements for his brain. We make something called Happy Saffron and Brain and Body Power Max. His mood stabilized, his anxiety lessened, better husband, team member, lost weight. It was very common for our patients if they're overweight, stronger, more energy. He started to help his family get well. Get it, give it away, keep it forever. You have to share what you learn in order to really solidify it in your soul. I think what most people miss about leadership is that it's a brain function. So when you think of where leadership starts, it's your brain. Or where leadership education should start, it should start with the brain. Where does happiness start? Because ultimately we want to be leaders to be happier and help other people be happier. Where does a healthy body start? Because if you don't have a healthy body, you can't be a great leader. It's a very important point. We'll actually talk as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. So being healthy is important. But where does healthy start? Starts in your brain. Well, what about relationships? Again, they start in your brain. That's where you fall in love, stay in love, or make bonehead decisions that get you out of love. And so, I was just been thinking about Muhammad Ali a lot this week, because I think he was my first Olympian that I got to scan. But ultimately, your brain is involved in everything you do and everything you are, including being a leader. It's just so clear after looking at all these scans that when your brain works right, you work right. And when it's troubled, you have trouble in your life. So when people think of troubled leadership, we need to start thinking, I wonder what's going on in their brain. So healthy brain, happier, healthier, wealthier, more successful, you're a better leader. And when your brain is not healthy, sadder, sicker, poorer, less successful, often because you make poor decisions and you're not a good leader. And so, I often say in the 1960s, space was the new frontier. Clearly now in 21, it's the space between your ears. And with my ears, you could call me Spock for the brain. That's funny, Spock for the brain. Except I can't do this, so maybe not. So why is the brain the next frontier? Because they run the world. They run the stock market, the local market, huge corporations, mom and pop shops down the street. Brains run governments, although probably not that well. Schools, this is our program in the Fraser Academy in Vancouver, Canada. Brains run churches. Pastor Rick Warren and I have had a collaboration well over a decade now. Brains run families. These are two of my grandbabies. And you. But most people rarely think about their brains, which is a huge mistake, because success in anything you do starts with a healthy brain. So your competitive advantage or your disadvantage as a leader is the actual physical functioning of your brain. So in thinking about this talk, I've actually been thinking of writing a book on the neuroscience of leadership. I just want to talk about really simple ideas. And number one is your brain is the most complicated organ in the universe. There's nothing as complex as the human brain, nothing. It's estimated we have 100 billion nerve cells. Each cell in your brain is connected to other cells by up to 10,000 individual connections. I mean, if you really think about that, it's going to blow your mind. Your brain is actually more complicated than any computer that we have developed so far. You have more connections in your brain than there are stars in the universe. And even though your brain is only 2% of your body's weight, about 3 pounds, uses 20 to 30% of the calories you consume. And so if your brain is involved in everything you do and everything you are, it just becomes critical to love it and take care of it. And nobody loves their brain. Why? Because you can't see it. You can see the wrinkles in your skin or the fat around your belly, and you can do something when you're unhappy with that. But because people don't look at their brain, they just don't care. In talking about leadership, it's just absolutely essential to talk about the leader part of your brain. There's a specific part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. And it's called the executive part of the brain, or the CEO. So this is very important. How many of you have children? Well, I have 4. And odds are, if they're like mine are from 17 to 44, my goodness. They make better decisions starting at around 24, 25, 26, because the front part of their brain, the executive part of the brain, call it the prefrontal cortex, becomes myelinated. It actually, you are not an adult, not until you're about 25, and more likely 25 in girls and 27 or 28 in boys, because that's when your brain finishes development. This is why you should not be smoking pot as a teenager or a young adult. I'm actually not a fan of it at any age, but it delays development. This is why bad food and alcohol decrease the development of the brain. So when we're babies, the back part of our brain becomes myelinated. And just so you know, this process, it's where your nerve cells get insulated. They actually get wrapped with a white fatty substance called myelin, and it helps your brain work faster, work more efficiently. And when we scan little kids, they have super busy brains. But as they age, they settle down because they're more efficient. And this is why, if you want to be a good leader of your family, you have to model, but also protect developing brains. And it's just no surprise to me that Simone Biles and some of the other Olympians struggle with their mental health. Think of the traumatic brain injuries she must have had learning how to do those insanely dangerous gymnastic moves. Not good for developing brains. Oh, by the way, fame is terrible for developing brains. Fame has side effects. Mostly it wears out the judgment center of your brain, and it wears out the pleasure centers, making these kids more vulnerable to anxiety and depression. So there's this part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, the front third of your brain, largest in humans and any other animal. It's estimated to be 30% of the human brain, 11% of the chimpanzee brain, 7% of your dog's brain, unless you're Fraser. Fraser was my bulldog. I'm certain it was no more than 5% with the decisions he made. 3% of the cat's brain and 1% of the mouse's brain, which is why cats need 9 lives and mice get eaten by cats.
This is one of my favorite topics. We're in trouble as a society. So we need to understand what our brain is listening to and change it. So I wanted to start with a story. I have been blessed this year. Dr. Phil really understands my work. I've been on his show 7 times this season, and he says, if you don't understand the brain, you don't understand the person. Well, about a decade ago, we did a show together on compulsive cheaters. And Jose had cheated on his wife 8 times in 4 years that we know about. And his wife had a gun and she was going to shoot him, and it was perfect for Dr. Phil. And when I scanned Jose, this is a SPECT scan. SPECT is the study we do at Amen Clinics. He's got low activity in the front part of his brain. So this is a big part of the focus area of your brain. And those holes means he's got really sleepy frontal lobes. So he's easily distracted, disorganized, short attention span. And he was excitement seeking. And for whatever reason, Jose and I, we really came to love each other, and he did everything I asked him to do. I love that because it works. What we did was we got very clear on his goals, but not work, relationships. What do you want? He wanted to be married because he didn't want his daughter growing up in a broken home like he did. With work, and he was working in a tattoo parlor. He wanted to be better. With his money, there's always a problem. With his physical, emotional, spiritual health. So we do goal setting in the 4 big circles of your life: your brain, your mind, your relationships, and your soul. Why do you care? And then I taught him these 2 words. These are the most important 2 words in the English language when it comes to your health. Then what? If I do this, then what happens? If I say this, then what happens? And then we worked on all 12 of the steps. So that was his scan before. 7 months later, his brain was better. He hasn't cheated since. We're at a decade. And oh, by the way, he went to nursing school, then he went to nurse anesthetist school, and he's making like 200 grand a year. And his children are not being raised in a broken home, which is his goal. So step 1, you got to know your goals. But too often people think of this as work related. And I'm like, no, that's how you burn out. They need to be relationships, work, money, physical, emotional, spiritual health. What do you want? So that's step 1. Step 2, you got to get your brain right. If your brain's not right, you're not right. And it doesn't matter if you do anything else. With a healthy brain, you're happier, you're healthier, you're wealthier, you're more successful. Why? Because you make better decisions. Ultimately, it's the quality of your decisions, moment by moment, over time, that determine your happiness, your health, your wealth, and your success. Over the years, I've been able to boil down brain health into this very simple phrase. If you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. Blood flow is just critical. The number 1 brain imaging predictor of Alzheimer's disease is low blood flow. And basically it comes down to this question: is it good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that question with information and love of yourself, love of your family, love of your mission, you do the right things. Step 3 is you have to know your brain type. Everybody's got a different brain. And I've had 2.5 million people take our online questionnaire. It's called our Brain Health Assessment, brainhealthassessment.com. And you'll know, are you a balanced brain type, spontaneous? That's really my ADD group. Short attention span, distractibility, restlessness, impulse control. It's important to get it treated. Doesn't necessarily mean medicine, but medicine for some people is life-changing. But I have strategies for each of these types. The persistent people are the OCD people. And if you have ADD, I watched the chat, a couple of people go ADD and creative, and that is absolutely true. The sleepier your frontal lobes, the more outside of the box thinker you are, but don't hire the ADD person to be your executive assistant. They will make you crazy. You hire the persistent people and the cautious people to be your assistant, because they will follow through on what you need to get done. The sensitive types are empathic or empath people, but they can struggle sometimes with negative thoughts. The cautious people are anxious. But if you know your type, you can then take the supplements or sometimes medication to help balance your brain. Step 4, you want to lock up the distractions. And I love this quote. The best way to reduce stress in your life is to stop screwing up. And how do you make better decisions? Well, you know your motivation. You put those words up. You have to have a stable blood sugar, which means you need to eat to stay focused. I love this study they did at Emory University where they took 107 married couples, tested their blood sugar at the end of the day, and then gave them voodoo dolls. And they asked them to express their feelings about their partner with the pins in the dolls. And the people who had the lowest blood sugar levels had more than twice the number of pins in the dolls. So if you get hangry, that eating protein and healthy fat at every meal helps to balance your blood sugar and your attention and helps to protect your loved ones from your hangriness. 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Sleep is absolutely essential. Little to no alcohol. I'm not a fan of alcohol. Ever since I started looking at the brain in 1991 and I saw the damage it did to scans, I have been railing against it, and it's not gotten me a lot of fans. Healthy vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids. All of you on this call, you should go to the lab and get your vitamin D and omega-3 index taken. I actually think most people should be taking 5,000 international units of vitamin D a day and 2,000 units of omega-3 fatty acids. But you got to get your nutrients right. You also want to avoid trigger foods that steal blood flow to your brain. Did you know that gluten decreases blood flow to the brain? It gives you brain fog, and dairy and sensitive people as well. Surround yourself with like-minded people. People are contagious, like COVID. And if you're around people that are constantly poking and distracting you, you need to put your phone on airplane mode. So dopamine is made deep in the brain in an area called the VTA, or ventral tegmental area, also an area called the substantia nigra. It works in this very interesting area called the striatum. And this is, think of it as the pleasure center in the brain, and it activates your frontal lobes. So dopamine has two pathways. One, it helps you feel awesome, but it also helps you focus. And so you never want to wear out your dopamine neuron. I am so excited to be part of GrowthDay. When it comes to your life, I always think of people in 4 big circles. That you have a biology, so the physical functioning of your brain and your body. It's critical. Your brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Your skull is really hard and has sharp bony ridges. So we have to protect it. And then there's the psychological circle, which is how we think. But there's also a social circle, how we get along with other people.
and a spiritual circle, which is, why do you care? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? And trouble in your life can happen in any or all of the circles. And optimization, which we're going to talk about today, happens in all of the circles. So what I'm going to do today, though, is I want to talk about, because this is about mindset, the psychological circle. And this information comes from my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. And but I actually want to go back a decade. And I just finished another book of mine, Change Your Brain, Change Your Body. And it was a Sunday morning, and I was really happy because I'd finished the book, and I've written a lot of books, but you know, they take a lot of effort. And we were going to church, and I just remember how happy I felt. And then as we got to church, we go to this big church in Newport Beach where I live. And I told Tana, my wife, why don't you drop Chloe off at Children's Church and I'll go save us seats. And as I walked toward the sanctuary, I saw hundreds of donuts for sale. And I've been going to church since I was 4 years old. But today it pissed me off. So I'm like, I'm going to church to get my soul fed. These people are trying to kill me because there's not one healthy thing about donuts. And then right around the corner is bacon and sausage. These are actual pictures from that day because I was so irritated. And I just felt like I got hit in the stomach repeatedly. And before I walked into the sanctuary, I saw them cooking hundreds of hot dogs for after church. And I'm so upset. And then when I sat down, the minister started talking about the ice cream festival they had the night before. And I just can't tell you how unhappy I was because I'm going to church to get my soul fed. And when my wife found me in church, I'm typing on my phone and she hates that. She gave me that look that only my wife is allowed to give me. There's not one other person I would take that look from. But she gave me that look like, why are you doing that in church? Don't you know you're going to hell? And so I showed her what I was writing. Go to church and get donuts, bacon, sausage, hot dogs, ice cream. They have no idea they are sending people to heaven early. Save them, then kill them. This is not the plan. And I remember that Sunday morning, I have no idea what the minister said. I just prayed that God would use me to change the culture of food at church. And it was fervent, but during the prayer, my mind, because your mind's always messing with you, my mind went, oh, great. How's that going to happen? You're a psychiatrist, you look at people's brains, you have no connection to changing the culture of food at church. But as you'll get to know me during this talk, I sort of have an attitude problem. And I'm like, well, that's my prayer. Deal with it or not. And no lie. 2 weeks later, Pastor Rick Warren called me from Saddleback Church. Some of you may know Pastor Warren. He's the author of our generation's best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life, sold more than 50 million copies. And he's the senior pastor at Saddleback Church with 20 locations around the world, including a very large online presence. And he called me up and he said, Dr. Amen, I've seen your work on public television. I'm fat. My church is fat. Will you help me? And I laughed and I said, "You have me from hello," knowing the prayer that I had prayed 2 weeks earlier. It was a very special moment. And so Pastor Warren, Dr. Mark Hyman, and I created something called the Daniel Plan, which was to get the world healthy through religious and community-based organizations. The first week, January 15th, 2011, 15,000 people signed up. The first year, they lost £250,000. And they reported things like better energy, focus, creativity, sleep, and mood, reductions in stress, blood pressure, blood sugar, sexual dysfunction, and many medications. The program has now been done in thousands of churches, communities, synagogues, temples, mosques worldwide. And it's based on 5 pillars. Faith, which is why do you care? That's our spiritual circle. Food and fitness, our biological circle. Friends, which is our social circle. And focus, where you bring your mind always determines how you feel. Where you bring your attention, where you bring your focus always determines how you feel. But let's make no mistake, you are in a war for the health of your brain and body. Everywhere you go, someone's trying to sell you bad food that will kill you early. I often say the real weapons of mass destruction, ISIS, that you'll hardly ever hear about anymore, has nothing on our food industry. The real weapons of mass destruction, highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, which means it raises your blood sugar quickly, low fiber food-like substances stored in plastic containers. And the food industry uses neuroscience tricks to hook your pleasure centers and addict you to bad food. So for example, this is Catherine Webb, a incredibly stunningly beautiful model who's eating a cheeseburger for Carl's Jr. You know she would not have this body if she ate that food on a regular basis. Our social media apps are created to be addictive, to steal your attention. As the food industries go for stomach share, Facebook and Instagram and Google and so on, they're going for mind share. And how long can they keep you on these apps? In addition, the news is no longer the news because it is made for marketing and it keeps your eyeballs there longer if they scare you. And it's just so clear during the pandemic. When my wife would turn on the news, she'd be angry and anxious. And when she turned off the news, she was just much more normal, more herself.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.